In 2011, Justice Robert Montgomery, born in Africa to a Canadian doctor and his wife, returned to CAMH to talk about his childhood growing up on the grounds of mental health institutions across Ontario. Robert's father held a succession of positions, eventually becoming the medical director at the Ontario Hospital on Queen Street West in the 1940s.
Well, I'm Robert Montgomery. I'm a retired judge, but still working. And I lived here on these premises for a lot of years in 999, as it was then known. We had our living quarters up the stairs from the switchboard and administrative offices on the ground floor of the central building. And on the second floor, we had our bedrooms, dining room, and living room. They were quite large rooms. I think my brother and I shared a bedroom that was about 30 by 30, and the ceilings were 18 to 20 feet high. So we could play football practically in there. I went to Parkdale Collegiate for the time I lived here, and they in addition to calling it 999, they called it the Funny Farm, the Bug House, and the Looney Bin, and they had wonderful names for it. So my brother and I had to stand up for the proper concepts of mental health, and we held our own pretty well because we were both heavily involved in athletics and weightlifting, so nobody pushed us around.
That's good.
Another time I was playing baseball down at the baseball diamond on what was then Sunnyside with a bunch of guys from Parkdale, and an officer came along. He was afraid someone would get hit with a ball on the boardwalk which ran along there. So I think we were all in the Sunday school class together as well, and he questioned all of us. I hung back. He came to me, and he was a real Irish cop, and he said, "Where were you born?" And I said, "Africa." And he said, "Where do you live?" I said, 999 Queen. "Another lie, boy, and I'll lock you up." So that was the way 999 was viewed by the community in those days. We were fighting a rearguard action all the time.
By the 1940s, the hospital housed some 1,000 patients. Its imposing original asylum building, with its enormous dome, dominated the western Toronto skyline.
That dome carries a story for me. There was a patient in the hospital at that time by the name of Gurney. He had been a motorman with what was then the Toronto Street Railway, and he developed a fixation that that tower governed his life, and it was telling him what to do when he was running his Queen Street streetcar, and was eventually institutionalized here for a lot of years. He had a great interest in woodworking because of his boat building skills when he'd been a young man in the Maritimes. And the second time we came back to the hospital after the war, Dad decided to build a boat in the buildings that are still remaining.
At the back wall.
At the back wall.
The original asylum building was demolished in 1976. Today, only portions of the original wall and two former workshops built in 1889 remain from the hospital's historic past.
Gurney undertook to help him build the boat. he did most of the work. The boat was a success, but the greatest success was what it did to the patient. It changed his whole focus on life. He lost the fixations that had caused him to be institutionalized, and he left here and continued in the woodworking business in a casket factory, and he never returned to mental hospital after that. I was never frightened of a patient, never threatened by one. Jack and I, my brother, played baseball with them on their baseball team, and when they would be out walking with their attendants, they'd always, a lot of them would speak to anybody they saw on the grounds, and we'd stop and talk to them. I mean, we'd lived that life since we were able to walk, so it was not new to us. But I think the public has a greater awareness now of mental illness, and I hope that after CAMH gets really rolling in high gear, there will be other smaller units of a similar nature develop perhaps in other places in Ontario and in other provinces.
The Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH, is Canada's largest mental health and addiction teaching hospital, as well as one of the world's leading research centres in the area of addiction and mental health. Its Queen Street site has a long history as a psychiatric hospital, since being founded in 1850. CAMH is now redeveloping the Queen Street site to replace an outmoded institution with a new kind of hospital, fully integrated into the neighborhood to break down stigma. A centre of recovery, where being part of the community is part of the treatment.